Hello, how are you guys doing? Happy Friday. As you can see, I'm going to do my own TED Talk video. So you're not alone in the assignments that you have to create for my class this semester. Basically, what I wanted to do was touch on some of the questions that you all submitted to me on your note cards in class. You had asked some questions that we didn't get a chance to cover in the review last night or in class, and I wanted to make sure that the students who asked those questions got the responses that they were looking for, and this should help you in your study endeavors this weekend. So if you haven't seen my office, this is what it looks like. You can stop by anytime. I'm in 326 Purdue Hall, and would love to talk to you in more detail about these concepts. But for now, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview to answer some of your questions to make sure you feel confident for the exam. So question number 1 asked about examples of family time demands and had a question about whether or not vacation would count. So my response to you is that it is important to think about these stressors in terms of the terminology we used in class. So in class, we talked about different kinds of stressors. They can be challenge stressors or hindrance stressors, and they can also be work stressors or non-work stressors. So in relation to non-work stressors, there were 2 different kinds. So a non-work hindrance stressor and a non-work challenge stressor. Okay, I hope you're all still with me. So with those non-work hindrance stressors, we were talking about negative life events or talking about financial uncertainty. So things that happen in an employee's life outside of work that have negative effects on their ability to perform at work, right? These are hindrance stressors. On the other hand, you can also have non-work challenge stressors, and these come in the event of positive life events, or in this case, more of positive family demands. So for example, if you're going on vacation, that might be a stressor because you have lots of things that you need to perform at home in order to get ready for your vacation. You might also need to perform extra work at your job as you lead up to vacation, but the vacation itself is a positive event, typically. You might also think of non-work challenge stressors like similar to other positive events like getting married, where you are focused on this big event, and yes, it has some level of stress associated with it, but in general, it's a good thing, and so you're motivated and excited to complete this good thing in your life, and that's why it's considered a challenge stressor. So again, it's important to differentiate between, is something a challenge stressor? Is it motivating you? Is it pushing you? Or is it a hindrance stressor, in which case it's holding you back and then has more of those negative consequences. In addition, there was another question on same note card, so you get bonus points, whoever you are, for asking 2 very good questions. They asked about an example of instrumental support. So if you remember when we talked about social support, we talked about 2 different kinds, instrumental and emotional. Instrumental support is basically when you do something to help somebody out. You're actually helping them manage whatever that stressor is. For example, if you were having a hard time on an assignment in my class, you could come to my office hours and I could help point out to you resources where you could look for an outside academic source. Or maybe I walk you through your Amazon article and we talk through some examples related to class concepts. In this way, I would be giving you instrumental support because I'm helping you to tackle what it is that's stressing you out. I'm helping you to tackle that stressor, that demand. On the flip side, I could offer you instrumental support, I apologize, I could offer you emotional support where you come to my office and you say that you're having trouble with an assignment in my class, and instead I say to you, I understand that this is stressful, I know that you're having a difficult time, you will get through it, I believe in you. And instead of really helping you target the stressor, what I'm doing is just emotionally supporting you, giving you some uplifting advice that will help you through. Both kinds of support are important. We do need people to kind of give us our pep talk, to help us out, to support the feelings that we have. That's emotional support. But it's also beneficial if someone is willing to go the extra mile and help us tackle the stressor itself, help us reduce our workload or whatever that stressor is. So here, this person said, wouldn't instrumental support be like a coworker helping to reduce a pile of papers? Yes, exactly. That's exactly what instrumental support is. It's when somebody is helping tackle whatever that stressor is. So if it's role overload, they're taking off some of that overload. If it's daily hassles, they're trying to remove some of those hassles rather than just emotionally supporting those individuals. Okay, I hope that is not too much and that's helpful. So then I had a question about the format of the exam, and they asked, what is the format going to be like? As a reminder, like we discussed in class, the exam is 40 multiple choice questions, and then there are 6 short answer questions, and you get to pick 4 of them. So you get a little extra variety in which questions you get to choose from this time around, okay? And you'll have the whole class period to complete it. Okay, then we had this awesome question, which I really appreciate because it ties back, what is the point of what you're teaching us, Dr. Fulmer? Why do I need to know this? So this question says, what is the 4-component model of ethical behavior? And basically, why is it important to the workplace? So the 4-component model of ethical behavior really is a 4-step process that walks through why certain individuals engage in ethical behavior. So it starts with moral awareness, right? That you're aware that there is an ethical dilemma at play. It moves into moral judgment. So not just that you understand there's a moral or ethical dilemma at play, but do you recognize what the right and wrong answer is? Can you identify what the right course of action is, what the ethical course of action is? If you can determine the difference between ethical and unethical, then you have good moral judgment. If you have no idea what right and wrong is or what right and wrong would be in a particular case, you might be lacking in moral judgment. From moral judgment, we move into moral intent. And this is the extent to which somebody not only knows what the moral or ethical decision is, but is committed to doing it. So now I know that there is clearly a right or wrong answer, and now I'm committed to actually doing the right thing. So before you can engage in ethical behavior, you have to be committed to it. And then, so that's the 4th step. After moral intent, after you intend to do something unethical, then you act on it. You act in an ethical way, okay? So why do we care about that? Well, if we can understand these different steps to getting to ethical behavior, then when we want to make sure our employees are being ethical, we can take a step back to try to identify what individuals are going to be more likely to engage in ethical behavior. So really, if we see that there's unethical behavior happening in our organizations, we can take a step back and say, what might be contributing to this unethical behavior? Maybe we have employees that aren't aware of ethical issues, so we need to just do ethical training. What is an ethical dilemma? What should we be looking for? Maybe encompassed in that training is some ideas of moral judgment, right? So we talk about not just what a right or wrong answer is, but why that would be the case. And then maybe we need to think about why are maybe employees knowing what the right thing to do is, but they're not acting on it? Why don't they have moral intent? Why aren't they committed to doing the right thing? And here we might find that organizational policies or procedures are really encouraging employees to do unethical things. Think Wells Fargo, think Enron, right? What about those organizations led employees to go the wrong way, to steer off path? And if that's the case, then maybe we need to crack down on our leadership. Maybe we need to crack down on behavioral modeling. Are we role modeling? That's a Chapter 8 topic. Our behaviors, our ethical behaviors for our employees, because they're going to learn from us. We have to set the example as managers in an organization. So really the idea for this model, this 4-component model, is to understand why people are more likely to engage in ethical behavior and why sometimes they don't engage in unethical behavior. And that can help us kind of work backwards to identify who is more likely to be ethical, how can we continue to foster ethical behavior among our employees, okay? So that's another one off the list. We're down to our final, really, 2 note cards here. So this individual asked about the differences between prescriptive and descriptive ethical discussions. And this is a great question. So really, the difference here is in the approach that researchers take to study ethics. With a prescriptive focus, this is your classic, now I forgot the word, philosophy. This is your classic philosophical discussion of ethics. So when we're talking about ethics, we're really talking about why people should behave a way. What should they be doing? In an ideal world, what does ethical behavior entail? Okay, that's prescriptive. It's really that ideal pie in the sky, what we should be doing. Now, with psychologists and with business researchers, we recognize that employees don't always do what they should. And so we can study the ideal, but that might not actually represent what's happening in our workplaces. And it's on us to really tease apart what's truly happening and why in our organizations. So we use what is called a descriptive focus. And this means we are not so much focused on what employees ought to be doing, which is important, but instead focused on what they tend to do. Do they act ethically or unethically? And if they're acting unethically, why? So we're trying to tease apart what's actually happening in the world and then use that information to help improve it, versus the prescriptive focus, which is more on that ideal, if the world were great, what should people be doing? More philosophical kind of discussion. In addition, there was a question on the same note card, so you're my second favorite person, whoever you are, about negative reinforcement and how negative reinforcement works. So they said, would it be sensible to create rules that employees would want to avoid? In class, I hope I answered this last week, the best way to train your employees, the best way to get their behavior to align with your expectations is to use positive reinforcement. So we want our employees to be encouraged, right? So if you want to support behavior, identify what that behavior is, and then come up with a way to positively reinforce it. So if I want you to come to class, I want you to be in attendance, it's better for me to reinforce you when you come to class in a positive way. I can give you praise. Thank you for coming. It's so great that you're here. This is awesome. I could give you points, right? Oh, you get an extra point for every time that you come to class. I could give you some kind of small incentive like candy, right? Here's a piece of candy. Using any of those kind of reinforcement mechanisms is going to be much better for your employees and for shaping behavior. So whenever possible, you want to use positive reinforcement. But we did also talk in class about needing to balance. So sometimes we can't use positive reinforcement, and in fact, we must instead use a form of punishment. But that classic rule is that we should have five positive reinforcements to one type of punishment. And this helps to balance what we're giving our employees. So I hope that is helpful to you. Okay, our last question is focused on coping and the differences in coping. So if you remember way back several weeks ago when we started this unit, we talked about different types of coping. So we had methods of coping and we also had focus of coping. So with methods of coping, there are 2 methods we can use to cope with stressors in the workplace: behavioral and cognitive. So with behavioral coping, we are actually doing something. We're performing an action, a physical action that is in response to whatever that stressor is, or in response to that strain. With cognitive coping, we're not actually doing something, we're not physically doing something, it's more or less what we're doing in our brain. How does the way we think about a stressor or think about a strain help us to cope with it? For example, If you are experiencing stress, if you see the upcoming exam as a stressor and it's been a stressor in your life for a few weeks now, and it's led to some level of strain, you're probably feeling fatigue, maybe anxious, maybe you're not sleeping, right? So you're exhibiting some level of strain. How do you cope with this then? Well, one thing that you could do behaviorally is actually study for the exam, right? You can study for the exam. That's a behavior that you're exhibiting. You could also go out to the gym and work out. That's a way to deal with stressors, right? So you could go to the gym and work out. That's a behavior that you're performing. On the other hand, you could try to cope without actually doing anything. And this comes from what you do in your brain. So you could strategize about the exam. Think in your head about your priorities. Is this a priority? Do you need to manage your priorities? You could think about how you could study. So here you're kind of coming up with some strategies about what you could do, but you haven't actually done it, because if you're doing it, that's the behavioral. The other side of that is what we call problem-focused or emotion-focused coping. Okay? So problem-focused coping is when we try to get at the heart of the problem. We're trying to eliminate that stressor. Okay? We're trying to eliminate that stressor or minimize the damage of that stressor. So in this case, if you are struggling with the exam and you have some questions, problem-focused coping might include trying to understand the material, right? You can't minimize or really reduce the exam because it's going to happen one way or the other, right? On Monday, we're having an exam. So you lack control to actually remove the whole stressor. But you can try to deal with it head on by studying for it, by seeking help from me, right? Seeking resources from me. You could also try to cope with the exam, but in an emotion-focused way. And emotion-focused is when you're doing something that makes you feel better about the stressor, but you are not actually fixing the stressor itself, okay? So with the exam, you can complain to your roommate about me. You can vent about the class. You can think about other positive thoughts that have nothing to do with the exam, right? That try to get your mind in a better place. It makes you feel better about the exam, but it's not focused on the exam itself. So that means you're engaging in coping that will maybe alleviate your anxiety or alleviate your stress, but it's not really focused on, it doesn't do anything about the stressor itself, which is the exam. Then, if you remember in class, we talked about a little chart. So it's like this, right? Ooh, that's kind of crooked. Maybe like that. So in this case, you can have problem-focused behavioral coping, problem-focused cognitive coping, or emotion-focused behavioral coping, emotion-focused cognitive coping. So these each fit into different quadrants, okay? So as a main takeaway, if this went way too long for you, main takeaway is that behavioral coping is when you're actually doing something, right? Actually doing something in response to a stressor or a strain. So you're studying for the exam. That's an actual behavior. You're going to the gym. You're going out with friends. You're actually doing something. Cognitive coping is when you're not really doing anything. You're just thinking about what you could do. Okay? You're just thinking about what you could do. You could strategize, or you could engage in daydreaming, right? That's a way to cope. You're not thinking about the exam at all. Again, you're not actually physically performing an activity. Then with problem-focused coping, you're trying to get at the problem itself. You're trying to eliminate or minimize the stressor or the strain. You're trying to get at what can I do about this. With emotional-focused coping, you aren't so much as coming up with a solution for your problem, but you are trying to make yourself feel better about your problem. So again, you're trying to eliminate the anxiety that you feel. And to do that, you might seek out a friend, you might vent, you might try to do some things that will make you feel better, but that at the end of the day have done nothing to help you with the stressor itself. Okay, I hope that helped. It makes me feel a lot better that I've been able to answer all of your questions, and I really appreciate those of you who have taken the time to write down questions. If you couldn't come to the review, I hope this is helpful, and if you have any further questions, you guys, you still have 3 days to study, so get to doing it because I know, I really know, if you put in the time, you are going to be successful. If you put in the time, if you study hard, you're going to be successful. And you can use me as a resource. So contact me via email if you need help over the weekend. I'll do my very best to get back to you in a timely manner. Other than that, get a good night's sleep on Sunday night, eat breakfast before you come to the exam, and come in being rested and ready to perform well. Okay? Come in ready, come in confident. You're going to do awesome. I believe in you. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday, okay? Take care.